to all of our Israel Vision family of viewers worldwide. Our program today originates in the lovely hills of Benjamin near Jerusalem in a place called Mevasseret Zion.
In Hebrew, Mevasseret Zion means announcing the good news from Zion, and today we have good news for you, especially if you are interested not only in investment in Israel, but in what Israel has been producing. Our guest today on People Who Make a Difference is Jonathan Medved.
He's a serious entrepreneur and co-founder of Israel Seed Partners, one of Israel's leading venture capital funds. Thanks very much, Jonathan, for being with us today.
It's great to be here.
Tell us what Israel's been up to in the creative realm.
Well, I think Israel has become so important to all of humanity today in terms of the technology that we're working with and we depend on for our daily lives. Most of your viewers, if they were asked, how often do you use Israeli technology, I think would answer negatively, would say, I don't fly unmanned air vehicles for a hobby, or I don't need a flak jacket or armored Hummer or some night vision goggles, because of course everyone knows that Israel really has very strong defense and homeland security technologies. But Israel has also begun to affect every one of us, maybe dozens of times a day, and I'd like to share some of that with you.
Yeah, tell us about that. We want to know.
Well, every day when you open up your computer, whether it's a laptop or it's a PC on your desk, there is a processor inside. Many of us know that it's Intel inside. That Intel processor has been by and large developed here in Israel. Intel employs today over 6,000 Israelis doing microprocessor design, and the Pentium chip and the Centrino chip that powers your laptop were designed here in Israel. Now, if you open up your cell phone and start making calls, much of the guts of that cell phone have been developed here in Israel for companies like Motorola and others. But if you leave a voicemail for your son or your daughter, that voicemail box is being essentially developed and managed by a company called Converse Technology, which is an Israeli company. If you make a call and you're billed, some of us don't like to get billed, but that's reality. We're billed by a company called Amdocs. If you call a call center, when you're asking for a hotel reservation or a flight, and that call is being monitored for quality assurance, that's Israeli software from NICE and Verint that's doing that. If you're working on your computer and sending an instant message with something like ICQ or AOL Instant Messenger, that's technology that was developed here in Israel. And in terms of new technologies, things that are going to change our world for the better in terms of green and alternate energy technologies, Israel today leads the world in desalination, turning salt water from the sea into drinking water. The Israeli company IDE has been building these kinds of plants in 35 different countries. Soon, Israel will be producing 50% of its drinking water from the sea. We also are very strong in solar energy. One of our companies called Ormat, which is a very, very strong company, has been leading in geothermal and alternate energy, even producing energy in far-flung places like Hawaii from the volcano. That's an Israeli company. And to give you just a recent example, if you look at those Winter Olympics that many of us are watching today, there's a great deal of snow which has been produced because they were not blessed with having enough snow to start the Olympics. Guess who produced that snow? An Israeli company from a kibbutz was producing snow in Italy for the Israeli Winter Olympics. So many of us today just take these things for granted, but there's enormous amounts of exciting and new technology going on here in Israel.
Jonathan, what about in the medical field? I mean, that impacts every one of us around the world in different ways. Tell us some of those developments.
Israel has been really a leader in medical technology. In fact, over half of our researchers are engaged in medical technology. We're filing patents like crazy. And there are many, many companies that are really affecting our lives. For example, there's a company called Teva, which many of your listeners might not have heard about. Teva actually is the leading company in the world in generic drugs, meaning that the low-cost, more affordable capsules and pills that we all need to take are being produced by an Israeli company, which is the world power. In fact, they just bought an American company called IVAX, paid $8 billion to an American company. That's how big Teva is. But if you look at some of the new technologies that are being developed here, for example, in restoring spinal cord function. I mean, one of the most horrible things that can happen to anyone, God forbid, is to have some kind of a spinal cord injury like Christopher Reeve, Superman. Well, one of the last visits he made, in fact, the last visit he made in his life outside of the US was here to Israel to go focus on a company called ProNeuron, who are now engaged in field trials to try to restore spinal cord function in these terrible spinal trauma cases. There's a company called Insight up in the north of Israel who've developed a non-invasive cancer treatment to focus particularly on uterine fibroid cysts and other kinds of objects. This device basically uses focused ultrasound to blow away cancers without having to go in and use, a knife. There are so many new, exciting medical technologies. I mean, I just read this week about a group that was researching the Israeli grapefruit and found definitive linkage between eating a grapefruit every day and lowering your LDL. Okay, so there's just an enormous amount going on in this country of good things that are helping people, that are making money for investors, that are producing things that will improve all of our lives around the world.
Well, that brings us to the question now. You are specifically involved in a very interesting project, Israel Seed Fund. Tell us about that.
Well, this is a venture capital fund, and if you know a little bit about high tech, what happens normally is that an inventor or an entrepreneur comes up with an idea and says, I can change the world in this way or that way. And then, of course, they need funding to begin to do that. They got to build prototypes, they've got to go to market, and this doesn't happen with nothing. You need money. So there are funds that have been established called venture capital funds, where institutional investors, typically banks and insurance companies, will provide this very, very high-risk capital to managers like myself, who will then put this money to work backing these early-stage companies. So I established Israel Seed about 11 years ago in my garage together with my partner Neil Cohen, and we started with just a couple $1 million, and then today Israel Seed manages about $260 million of
My
capital.
goodness, that's marvelous.
So you're like an incubator. You like kind of get things started.
We do get things started, and we've been very lucky. The Israel Seed Fund was responsible for providing early stage funding to companies that many of your viewers might actually know, such as shopping.com, which is the world's largest comparison shopping site on the internet. If you want to save money, you go to shopping.com. It was just bought last year by eBay for $640 million. And this was a little company that started in our shop.
Wow. Now, how does a company qualify? How do they find you, or you find them, or what happens?
Well, in this country, there are about 50 active venture capital funds. So Israel Seed was just one of many, because again, Israel, next to Silicon Valley, is really the second most important source of this kind of company activity. To give you an idea of how big it is in Israel, last year there were over 400 companies that got funding from venture capital funds. That means every day in Israel, a new company coming out of nothing is getting funded. So and today we have literally thousands of these companies. Just to give you another idea, is that we have more companies traded, Israeli companies, that are traded today on NASDAQ, which of course is the stock exchange in New York that focuses on these kinds of companies, than any other country in the world outside of the United States. In other words, if you look at the country delegations that are traded on NASDAQ, you have the United States and then Israel, not Japan, not China, not India, not England or Germany.
Or Canada.
Or Canada. Actually, we just passed Canada a couple months ago.
That's amazing.
And it's a real testament to the strength of the Israeli entrepreneurial culture and the fact that we're trying to do something here. That everyone said, well, weren't you hurt in the business side here by the Intifada and by the terror? Well, we were and we weren't. Okay, in other words, if you look at our tourism, unfortunately, people stopped coming as much as they did. Now everyone's coming back because things are safer, and there's a sense that we're not going to give the terrorists a victory. We never gave up in high tech. One of the things which was remarkable the last 4 years is that while the whole world suffered from the downturn after the internet bubble blew up, we here in Israel actually doubled our market share of the world venture capital market. Because in America and elsewhere, when things went bad, a lot of the entrepreneurs said, you know what, we're going to go take it easy, we're going to go to the golf course, talk to us when the markets have returned.
Yes.
But we don't have a lot of golf here.
No.
You can look outside. And our people have no choice but to go and continue this creative process and to build companies. So we actually, even though we were suffering the terror and the horrible things that were happening here, thank God, which seems to have gotten a lot better, our companies continue to be built. And so, we really, I think, had a tremendous improvement over the last 4 or 5 years in Israeli high tech. We've now sort of taken our place as a true partner to the U.S. and as one of the most dynamic, technology centers in the world.
That's amazing. Don't you think, though, that with all the trouble that we've been through, with the bombs and the terror, etc., don't you think it made Israel even more creative, even in inventions to do with the cell phones to take movies and things like that?
We are very focused on homeland security technologies also. We're trying to make everybody safe.
That's right.
The war on terror is a war that we all are fighting, and we must win. Okay, we can't let these people ruin anybody's life anywhere around the world. Mm-hmm. And Israel's playing a strong, definitive role, not just here, but in places like India and in China and all around the world where we're all facing the same scourge and has to be stopped. So yes, we are focused very much on trying to sniff explosives and trying to, in fact, there's a company here who's actually developed a technology to see through walls so that commandos who are getting ready to bust into either it's a crack house or a place where terrorists are hiding can actually see where the terrorists are sitting, behind the walls before they go in. So these are technologies, by the way, which we're sharing with our allies and which are basically the good people of the world.
How wonderful, how amazing.
Do you think there's a connection between Israeli and Jewish ingenuity and the fact that Jews have been persecuted down through the centuries? In other words, they couldn't carry out the jobs of being a farmer or whatever.
Well, I think that our people have always placed a value on learning. From the very beginning in our scriptures and all the way through Jewish history, the word and learning, scripture is a critical thing. So when many peoples were not literate and were not learning, we've always been learning. And I think that that's an important part of our heritage, and it's shown in our Nobel Prize winners, It's shown in our universities, and it's shown in the people who are creating these companies. But I think that today, the thirst for creativity is something which is shared by peoples all around the world. And the Jews are simply an important nation who want to share what we're doing with everybody else.
But the numbers of Nobel Prize winners here in Israel or among Jewish people is far and far higher than on the average of the rest of the world.
That's true. It's actually about 25% of all Nobel Prize winners in the sciences and whatnot have been.
How do you explain that again?
I simply think that we are focused on learning and education.
I agree.
And that's why I think, by the way, it's important that we retain our traditional roots. In other words, as God forbid Jews assimilate and run away from our tradition, we might lose that. But the special nature of the Jewish people, being a people of Scripture and a people of God's Word, is that we have always viewed learning and working hard and creating. In other words, we're all according to our tradition, we are all partners in creation.
Yes.
Creation did not just happen over 7 days and then ended. Every day, creation is renewed. And our function as people, as God's servants, are to go out there and to continue this work of creation.
Jonathan, thank you for this incredible interview. I feel so excited myself and very stimulated, and I know you do. And I know that you're going to want to visit Israel, but I know you're going to want more information about how you can have a part in what Israel is creating this very day. Now, here's a thought to leave you with. Here's a marvelous promise, and I believe that this promise is at the bottom of the Jewish creativity gift. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth,
that He may establish His covenant, which He swore to your fathers.
And He's doing it right before our very eyes today.
Well, we want to leave you now and just wish you every blessing in your home, right from Medved Zion, announcing the good news from Zion. Shalom from Jerusalem. Shalom, I'm Jay Rawlings, and in this week's Fact or Fantasy, I'm going to continue on the thought from last week, and that is that Israeli inventions are strictly used for their own self-interest and for military purposes. Now that couldn't be farther from the truth. For example, in recent years, Israelis registered 1,046 patents in the United States alone. And this comes out to 174 patents per million residents. And this figure puts Israel third in the world behind only the United States and Japan in per capita patents or inventions, or registered inventions. Also, Israel invests more in research and development per capita than any other country. Israel's investments in R&D, such as a part of its gross domestic product, is not matched by any other country. And quote Aaron Chikanover, a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, he said, "I never thought of the money. For me, it's more the honor for Israel, a small country such as Israel, that can make it in the world in this way." Today, Israel is one of the most highly educated populations in the world, and statistics show that the Jewish state has had the highest percentage of scientists and technicians per capita in the world. Over 25% of its workforce in the technical professions. And Israel is the highest ratio, has the highest ratio of university degrees to population of any country in the world. Next, Israel is a flourishing, stable democracy that invests in its people and promotes ideas and creativity via the free flow of ideas. For example, Dr. Talil al-Sharif from Al-Quds University newspaper, he quoted, now this is a Palestinian periodical, and he said, "Israel has proved that for 50 years its real power is in its democracy regarding the rights of citizens, and where the laws are applied equally to the rich and the poor, the big and the small." Another columnist, a Palestinian, Atta al-Kamani, wrote in another Palestinian newspaper, and I quote, "I envy them, the Israelis, and their democracy. I respect the democratic discussion and debate and the sovereignty of the law and freedom of press." So Israel does have lots of technology, and it freely shares it with others around the world, and as well as democracy. It's a shining light among the nations. So this is Jay Rawlings reporting to you from Israel on Fact or Fantasy for this week. We'll see you next time. Shalom.
Welcome to the Still Small Voice. Question: are you a good listener? I've come to understand that listening is an art. And to listen, you also must hear, and so they go together. But you know, when we get together as a family, we love to talk. One talks and the rest listen, but we love to share our creative ideas with each other. And my question is, do you take credit for your creative ideas? After all, it's your mind where the ideas are formed, isn't it? Or are you like Albert Einstein, who said, "There are two ways to live your life. One as though nothing were a miracle, and the other as though everything were a miracle." That statement tells us something about Mr. Einstein, one of the world's foremost creative thinkers and scientists. He had enough sense to understand that his creative genius came not only from his own DNA, but also from outside of himself. In fact, he received the theory of relativity in a dream. The ideas just came to him. If we could just catch some understanding of the privilege that it is to hear that creative voice from outside of our world, when its tender and prophetic words speak their way into our very soul and heart, I think that we would be much more respectful and quiet and open to listening. This voice is very tender. It affects our attitudes. It affects our attitudes to our Creator. I found that as I began to listen to the still small voice, I became kinder to myself, to those around me, And also the still small voice taught me how to protect my own life. To many of us, God is like a waiter in a restaurant. He busies himself in the back room until we ring the bell. And then we expect him to come running and serve us. Is that how you see the lover of your soul? Did you know that there is one who has loved you from the very beginning? If you don't know that, I encourage you to go to the one book which is capable of bringing you life, the Bible. Begin with the Psalms and slowly taste the words and the ideas presented there as a testimony by fellow journeymen. Obviously, they were well acquainted with the still small voice to write down and worship as they did. What did they know that we have lost or missed or forgotten or maybe overlooked in our hectic lifestyles? For your questions, visit me at my beautiful website, stillsmallvoice.tv.